Welcome to another video. I'm Abaji. If you're new to this channel, I'll invite you to click on the subscribe button because we talk mainly about programming on our YouTube channel. And today what I have for you is how to build a web application, a guide for beginners. So I've been building web application for about 7 years. And what I have for you today is what I find myself doing over and over every single time that I am to come up with an application. So before we begin, we're going to cover what a web application is. A web application is unlike the traditional desktop application. A desktop application is what you have on your desktop, double click it and have it open so that you can interact with it. On the other hand, a web application is an application that runs on a web browser, and that application is hosted on a server somewhere that is feeding the browser all the requests that you are making to that application. And these applications are divided into different sections. So this is what you need to know before you start building a web application. Alright, so you have the front end of the application and the back end. The front end is what covers the HTML part of it, okay? The part that interacts with the users of the application. So this part is developed using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. This is what constitutes the look and feel of the application, the part that users see and interact with. And the developers that build the front end are called front end developers. Now, on the other hand, you have back end, and the back end is what constitutes the logic of the application, what the application is meant to do. For example, if an application is to take a request from the user or a data that is passed in by the user to a form and save it in the database, the back end will carry the data that is passing through this form and save it in the database used for that application. And the technologies used for this backend are called backend languages. They include Python, PHP, Ruby, Java, and so on. Great. So the developers that does this backend development are called backend developers. You guessed it. Yeah, backend developers. But nowadays, you see developers that does both back-end and front-end development, and they are called full-stack developers. And they are very, very common now. Almost everyone getting into web application development is now becoming full-stack developers because there are series of technologies that helps you do both back-end and front-end within no time. Great. So there are different stages of application or when building an application or to come up with an application all the way to hosting it. Alright, so I summarize this into 6 stages. Okay, so we're gonna go through these stages. So this is what I found myself doing over and over when I'm building an application or when I'm coming up with an application. So the first stage is the idea section or the idea part of the application. Right, so this can come up from a client in a way that a client can approach you as a developer and say, okay, this is my business. Okay, I have a business and I want to be able to have an application that can help me automate this business process. I want to have an application to be able to store all my daily sales. Okay, so this is an application in the making requested by a client. A developer himself or herself can come up with this idea. For example, you want to come up with an application that's going to generate you money. Let's say you want to build a POS application where users will be registered on your app and do some transactions. And as they're doing transactions with their clients, you are keeping part of that transaction or the part of that payment that is done using your app. So the idea there is initiated by the developer. So once you have the idea, you want to come up with the requirements, the application requirements. So this can include the application workflow that can be defined as what the application or what the users will be doing on the application. For example, a user comes in, they will want to register on your app. Will your app include registration, or will the administrator of the application create user accounts for users to be using to log in and out of the application? When they log in, where do they find themselves? How do they interact with the application? So all that can be defined in the application workflow. You have part B, that is system, hardware, and hosting requirements. Great. So this is what constitutes how the application will be hosted, or the hardware that's going to be running this application. So based on the idea, or based on what the system should be doing, or what the application should do, the hardware requirements will be brought up. Okay, or you will come up with a hardware requirement, because the requirements will determine or dictate what kind of hardware can run this application. The heavier the application, the more resources your hardware needs to acquire to be able to run this app. So on stage 3 is designing your application. This is where you look into your navigation panels, the form layout, the coloring, the logos and stuff like that. This is what your application will look like. Okay, so at this stage of the application, you want to sketch out your application. You want to sketch out how the application will look like, and this can be done using a pencil and a paper. As simple as that. Just sketch out how your front end will look like, what are the pages that you will have, how the pages will be laid out, how your forms will look like, what kind of colors you'll be having on the application. And this is gonna help the front end developers know exactly how to code the application. Great. So once you have your design on paper, you want to start coding it. Okay, you might start when developing the front end, that is going to be the user interface. So you use your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript skills to come up with a user interface. Now that you have that, you want to look into the backend technologies. You use the front end, connect it with the backend technologies, backend languages, code the logic of the application to do exactly what the users want, or what the client want, or what you, the developer, want to your application to do for you. Alright, so this is coming up with a prototype. A prototype is an application that is good enough to be tested or used in an environment or in a live environment. We have to go through the process of testing the application to make sure that the application is done and it is to the requirement. That is what we have on stage 5. You want to come up, like for example, if the user is the one that come up with the idea, you want to invite those users to sit and test the application and be sure that all the features of the application are implemented and the user interface is usable or user friendly. Now at this stage is where most of the time developers have a little bit of conflict with the users of the application, because during the system requirement stage, the users will define everything that should define everything that the application should be doing. So the developers will be coding based on that requirement. But be careful, like I said, users sometimes don't know exactly, or they might tend to forget some sections, some critical section of the application. So when they start testing the application, they might start remembering those stuff and be like, oh, we wanted this to be added, or we wanted this to be changed. So that can have a heavy impact on the development time or the development modalities of this application. So the developer might change a significant amount of code after this user test, okay, or the testing of the application. we sometimes call user acceptance test. So at this point, sometimes it can bring up conflict between the users and the developers. I want you to add this. No, but you did not tell me this at the beginning stage of the application. So you'll need to add more money. No, this should have been added. You know that this should be added. You know what I mean? Yeah, so cater for time to make sure that this is covered. Okay, so I always have it in the back of my mind that the users will come up with this. So I prepare ahead of time how to deal with that when we get there. Great. So we're gonna move to step number 6. In fact, before moving to step number 6, this step 5 can be repeated multiple times. So after doing a test, you might go back to the development environment, start adjusting all the requirements or all the comments that you get to the users or during the testing. So you can repeat this step about 2 or 3 times. Most of the time, about 3 times will do the job. So right after that, we are ready to host the application. Okay, so after users test the application and they are happy with it, you can now move over to hosting the application. And this can be done on local or on an online platforms. So on a local platform, you will just come up with your servers, and provided you have the infrastructure, you can build your own infrastructure, but it is a little bit more tedious than deploying on an online platform. The local platform will be like having your own server, setting up the operating system, doing the initial setups, the setting of the Python, or the language that you'll be using, all that server administration stuff. So if you don't have a server administrator, you will be the administrator at the same time be the developer. So it can be quite intense at some point. Alright, so but most people will go on with online deployment. This is taking advantage or taking leverage of the online platform like Amazon, AWS, Heroku, Python Anywhere to deploy your application, and it can be usable or accessible through the internet from any device. Great. So these are the steps that I keep following over and over, or the step that I found myself doing over and over while building a web application. So I hope you find this informative, and I would invite you to go to appcoms.com to choose a project and start your first application. We've covered multiple web applications, so you how to build it from start to finish. You have beginner level application, you have advanced level application. We are keeping on adding more and more coding and application development tutorials on our website. Thank you, and I see you in another video. By the way, before you go, make sure you click on that like button if you like this video, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you will not miss our future videos. So with that said, I'll say again, yes, again, see you in another video.